Hello and welcome back. In this video we'll be making a soundproof little drum booth for my drumming, but this can apply to any instrument, singing, any area you want to add some soundproofing to that's not permanent. I start here with some sheets of 1/2-inch plywood and I'm measuring my height and then strike the line across here with the T-square for the cut line. But you'll also see that I will mark a second line here, and this is an offset for my particular circular saw so that I can use my straight edge here as a guide. This particular circular saw is 1.5 inch offset, so I measure that off of each line so that I can clamp that straight edge there, which allows me to cut on that line to get my final height. So I just run the circular saw through and repeat this 3 times for the 3 full-size panels that I have. And then I'm left with these slightly smaller pieces that I'm going to start applying some paint to. I'm using the same color as my finished room downstairs, which is this light blue. And I apply that to one side of all 3 sheets just to make it a little easier down the line. Now I'm going to take those 3 individual panels and rip them in half. Now they're 4 feet. I'm going to be cutting them into 2-foot sections here. Now I'm marking here for my hinges. I'm getting a consistent dimension there just by using a square. And I'm just kind of eyeballing them in place where I want them, and I keep this clamp here to help with that. I mark some holes and then I pre-drill just to make starting the screws a little bit easier. And I come back through and install that hinge on those holes. And I repeat that on both sides of each of these panels, kind of putting them back together, but now with a hinge at that 2-foot part. And this will allow them to bend and flex, and you could fit whatever shape you're trying to add soundproofing to. It also makes it a little easier to move, as you could pop some of the hinges off and break these pieces down into 2-foot sections. I put it together and realized that I will need a third one in the middle there as the plywood bows, but I can add that later. I also wanted to add a little window here, which I'm going to do just by measuring this piece of plexiglass. And I'll make a quick and easy cut here, and I'll put the cut edge towards the inside, and you'll see what I mean in a second here after I cut it here to help with some movie magic. Thank you. Now I'm measuring for where I'm going to put that window, and I determined this just by eye and seeing what made sense. So I'm lining it up here on my piece, and I'm striking the line of the exterior side of the window, and then I'm coming in about 1/2 inch or so on all sides so that that's where I can screw to the piece of plywood after I cut the hole. So I marked this interior line, which will be my cut line, and then the outer line is where the piece is. And I just do a sanity check there before cutting it here with the jigsaw. And I cut on that interior line. And that will allow that window to sit in there. And I'll put one on each side so that it makes a full 18 by 24 inch window. And I clean up those corners there. And you can see how this attaches. So now this is the soundproofing. I'm using a 3M90 high strength adhesive, which I'll spray to both the piece of plywood and the acoustic panels that I picked. And this will get them to adhere to the panel so you're not permanently gluing them to your walls, which I don't recommend. At least with these plywood panels, you could pick them up and move them and change the orientation or cut them up and make them smaller, whatever you'd like, as opposed to gluing them to your walls where you'll have to probably rip down drywall or at the very least do a lot of sanding. So I do not recommend attaching these directly to your walls. So I just go through, I line everything up ahead of time and then come back and do small sections at a time, just spraying that adhesive on both surfaces and then putting it back in place where I had it originally. Now doing the final affixation of the window here, I start by just taking off some of that protective sheet on the side that goes down. And I just drill a couple pilot holes here, as this plexiglass probably would crack if you drilled straight into it. So I just do a few holes here and there, just enough so the screws can go through, and then screw it right to the piece of plywood there. And it keeps its shape pretty well with the amount of screws I put in. Now I'm showing another little process here to make some acoustic panels that go on the wall. And by doing that, I'm using here a piece of cardboard as an experiment. And I'm just spray painting the outside of it so that if there's any edges exposed, it blends in a little bit better than that brown from there in the hardboard. The rest of the panels I made from this 1/8-inch hardboard, which works great, and the cardboard worked great and is holding up too. And I followed the same process just by applying this glue to both surfaces. And this was more of an experiment with the cardboard and the panels, as I wasn't sure it would work, but it worked great. Now by doing this, you can make smaller acoustic panels that you can make to any size you want, and they're relatively modular where you don't have to commit and glue them right to your wall. You can affix them with a single screw or two. So I glue them down the same way, lining them up ahead of time and then patting them down. Now I do the same thing in the booth. I'm adding them to the ceiling. And instead of gluing them, as I didn't want anything permanent, I'm just using pins, just regular sewing pins, and putting them up through there. They go right into the ceiling. And as this is that acoustic panels where there is holes in it, the holes virtually blend in. So if I ever wanted to remove this or change anything, nothing is permanent. It can all come down without being noticed. And all I have to do is remove a few pins. This was also an experiment, and I just wanted to show it as part of this video, as it worked great in this particular instance, where nothing is permanent down here. It's all a few screws, pins, adhere it together, and it makes a pretty decent sound booth. So I lined them up here just by keeping that metal in the middle so that I didn't have any conflicts when I was putting the pins in, and just used up the remainder of my panels to fill up the ceiling. Now I wanted to do one final detail here, so I'm making little angle cove pieces that will cover the insides of the windows, as I never finished that plywood edge that was cut. So I'm making my own out of some scrap wood here. I start by ripping down the sides and then cutting the other side off there to start making the angled piece. And I repeat that on all the joints. And then I'll come back through after this and cut this virtually in half to make about 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch angles that you can use to cap the inside of those plywood edges. I gloss over some of this in the video, but I just cut them down to length here, getting one side straight and then doing my final cuts. And now for the install, I'm just pin nailing them into place here, as you can see on the outside. It just caps that unfinished plywood edge and makes it a little neater looking. And I left a gap in the middle where the pieces come together so that it doesn't bind there. And just throwing a few pin nails in held it in place just fine. So this is the completed booth here. It works great. I would say it's about at least half the reduction in noise in the basement. It's finished. It's very, very loud down there beforehand, and this cut down the noise substantially. I thank you all for watching. Be sure to like and comment this video and let me know what you'd like to see next. Thank you.